Very good afternoon. So this would be on critical aspects of oculoplasty and ocular trauma, what we should be teaching our postgraduates to do. I strongly believe that oculoplasty is not just restricted to this 5-6 questions in DNB or just attending to 30% of practical cases from exam point of view. It has whole lot of wide array of clinical conditions involved in this subspecialty, starting from lacrimals, orbit, oculoplasty, ocular trauma and processes, and ocular oncology. The proportion varies depending upon where we practice. As taught in our medical schools, it's important that we need to have a systematic evaluation, starting with history, clinical evaluation, which will allow us to develop a set of differential diagnosis, followed by conclusive test, which should be very focused, doing a separate clinical test, lab, and radiology to arrive at a diagnosis, definitive diagnosis, and that will help us to develop a definitive plan for that particular patient. So let me illustrate this point of developing the importance of developing this set of differential diagnosis with a set of cases here. Imagine we have a patient presenting with epiphora. So I'm going to be presenting to you a set of conditions which can have the same type of clinical condition but different clinical features which will help us to arrive at a differential diagnosis and definitive diagnosis. My case number 1 would be a middle-aged lady presenting with intermittent epiphora, and she often has this kind of redness and occasional watering, either eyes, and more worse in left eye at present. If you can have a closer look at here, we can see a soddening appearance of the medial canthus. There is punctal eversion, classical case of angular blepharitis where we need to treat this patient medically, and that would resolve her condition. Let me go to the second case where again the patient presented with epiphora, intermittent discharge, congestion, and if you do a careful clinical examination, you can see a small swelling over the canalicular area. If you invert the lid and see, you can see the powdered punctum. That again says it's a classical case of chronic canaliculitis, where again the management is going to be different. Dealing here, DCR is not the answer. We have to be dealing with the canaliculotomy and expression of this canalicular material, and antibiotic syringing would be the right way to treat this patient. Case number 3, I have two set of patients here. This patient, the diagnosis is quite obvious. We have deviation of mouth. He has got a retraction of upper eyelid, lower eyelid, and epiphora in this case would be because of multiple reasons. Possible reasons could be an ocular exposure, an exposure keratopathy, and lag of ophthalmos, lacrimal pump failure, and sometimes aberrant regeneration also can result in this type of epiphora. Treatment, again, depending upon the clinical presentation, in acute stages, we would probably want to protect the ocular surface by at least minimum taping at night and copious use of lubricants. And later stages, if it doesn't recover, probably we would be talking about the surgical intervention here. Look at this patient as compared to this patient. She has a scar right across the face. Definitely, I would be ruling out a secondary nasolacrimal duct obstruction, but that's not sufficient in her condition. We would be addressing her cicatricial ectropion also to have complete resolution of her symptoms. So case number 4 would be a classical chronic acrocystitis, which has developed lacrimal abscess and it's granulating. If I'm planning external DCR, I would probably wait for the inflammation to resolve and then plan surgical intervention. Case number 6 would be an involutional entropion, again presenting with epiphora because of ocular surface inflammation. The treatment would be different. And this patient has got an ectropion. Again, the presentation would be similar, but treatment and the way you approach. What I'm trying to say here is for a single condition of epiphora, we have this set of differential diagnosis. Unless we do a systematic evaluation, we would probably be missing out many of these patients. The second important thing that we need to know and we need to teach our postgraduate would be the natural cause of the disease and its manifestation and different technology that we need to use to diagnose the case. As for example, this patient has got a preseptal cellulitis where the treatment is going to be just oral antibiotics. And when it progresses to an orbital cellulitis, we need to be more aggressive in monitoring these patients, right, starting from the vision to progression of the disease, which can result in blindness also. We need to admit the patient, we need to treat the patient with systemic antibiotics. Even after systemic antibiotics, if the condition does not resolve, that is when we need to suspect subperiosteal abscess. There we have a definite role for radiology, and we might have to plan a surgical evacuation as well. Sometimes the patients can present to us later, like after the resolution of symptoms with blindness or something, then that is where we need to suspect whether the patient has developed one of the complications of the natural course of the disease. Like as in this patient, we are dealing with the superior orbital thrombosis and also the cavernous sinus thrombosis. We should also know the response, and we should know when to titrate our response depending upon the response of the patients. As in this patient, a congestive thyroid eye disease, you can see the scar right across the neck post-thyroidectomy, having an ocular surface disruption. And just doing a medical decompression with IV methylprednisolone is not going to help her. We need to protect her ocular surface, and that is what I have done here. I've done a lateral torsography. The worst I have done suture torsography as well. After 10 days of medical decompression with this surgical maneuver, she has improved quite well, and this is how she looked in the follow-up period. It is important that we teach our postgraduates to look beyond the eyes as well. A classical case, a clinical case of acute dacryocystitis like presentation, but if you do an ENT examination, we find a mass in the nose and also a lesion that is replacing the palate, where we need to do a proper radiological workup and manage the patient accordingly. Also, even for small cases like patient presenting with a chalazion, we need to look for details. Like as in this patient who presented with a small lesion in the eyelid, looking exactly like a chalazion, but if you see carefully, you can see a patchy loss of eyelashes. There is increased vascularity, and that should prompt us to do a biopsy. And we found out a poorly differentiated carcinoma. So this patient had to be taken up for excision of the mass followed by reconstruction. So it's important we look for the details as well. I'll just take one more minute, Anaha. It's important that we also do a proper documentation. This patient I had seen in 2015 with a suspicious lesion. I advised a biopsy, but she was not willing for the biopsy and she lost to follow up. And 4 years later, she comes back again with a lesion exactly in that area, which has progressed, and a classical everted ulcerative lesion, which on biopsy proven to be a basal cell carcinoma. So good documentation is very important to teach the patient and also for our own clinical purpose. In case of trauma, again, prioritizing our treatment. If our general condition, the general condition of the patient is not stable, that is the priority that we need to give. Check vision, rule out ocular pathology, and follow a methodical way of examination. Know those conditions that would require emergency treatment before we proceed. This COVID times, it's a challenge for us to have classroom teaching, but we do have lots of this online resources. So if we use this online resources optimally, we are not missing out much. So thank you very much for a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vidya. That was a beautiful presentation.
My pleasure.
Very good slides. Yeah. Dr. Akshay, yeah, I'd like you to comment. Yeah, please.
No, I think Dr. Vidya hit the nail on the head. She's covered the entire spectrum of conditions that every resident should know, because why ophthalmology in general has a lot of systemic connections to every other part of the body, but more so I believe oculoplasty. And recently, as we've learned from our mucormycosis experience, something happening in the lung like COVID ends up leaving you so immunocompromised that fungal infection can start from the nose and enter the orbit. And even other things like, say, congenital ptosis, to know when to operate such that the child doesn't become amblyogenic. Identifying masquerades of ptosis like myasthenia and thyroid eye disease, and also being able to handle emergencies like trauma, abscesses, cellulitis. So I think from a postgraduate perspective, while oculoplasty as a subspecialty may be quite big, there are 5 or 6 surgeries that every resident should know. And this includes, a congenital nasolacrimal duct obstruction probing, or DCR and DCT, a basic lid repairing following, simple trauma. Maybe complex traumas can be difficult. and evisceration, enucleation. And if they're really good, perhaps even entropia and ectropia. So these list of basic surgeries have to be a part of every resident's armamentarium, that they should be able to practice this when they go out into private practice. And from a clinical point of view, diagnosing thyroid eye disease, myasthenia, and other syndromic associations like neurofibromatosis. These things, if they are able to do, I think we need to, if we are able to make this a part of the curriculum of residency training, we would have done our job well from oculoplastics perspective. And really like to congratulate Dr. Vidya for covering this very comprehensively.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Akshay. You have covered all the clinical oculoplasty parts. I'd like to just deviate and ask you another question. What is your take on aesthetic cosmetic oculoplasty? What is the demand today, and what is it's a niche kind of practice. So what is your take on that?
I think I've been watching the program since the beginning, and you've been asking every panelist one or two tricky questions. So this is the tricky one for me. No, but that's actually a very good question, because during our residency training, aesthetics was really not a big part of it. We were exposed to it a little bit, but nothing major. And to be honest, things like my first filler or my first mid-face lift are things that I have seen, assimilated, learned, and finally done for the first time in private practice. There is a demand. There is a growing demand. Patients are becoming more aware about whom, like say, for example, a blepharoplasty or a tear trough filler. The patients themselves know that an ophthalmologist or an oculoplastic surgeon is better trained to do this than a general plastic surgeon. So they, trawl social media, look out for the right people. So not just aesthetic skills, but also aesthetic skill promotion is equally important from an oculoplastic surgeon's point of view. Having said that, it still is not an absolute necessity, because there are many oculoplastic surgeons who have drawn a clear line that they are more into functional and will not be doing aesthetic surgery. It doesn't stimulate them intellectually, it's not satisfying enough, or perhaps they have limited exposure. On the other hand, there are oculoplastic surgeons who've gone ahead and said, you know what, forget functional. I am purely oculofacial plastic surgery. So the skies are limit.
My question was, do you think this should be a part of the curriculum in their residency training, at least an introduction to it, so that they are probably at least stimulated. It is up to them whether they take it or not.
True. And actually, as per the ICO's recommended curriculum, basic aesthetic surgery, blepharoplasty, botulinums, and filler are a part of
especially botulinum
recommended curriculum.
Especially
recommended curriculum. It's not even in the good to know. It is in the must know category. So yes, it should be.
Yeah. Just food for thought, probably. Dr. Sushmita ma'am.
Very troubling questions.
Thank you. Dr. Sushmita ma'am, your just a quick
I agree that there has to be an introduction. They should know that this is possible.
Exactly.
But whether or not they do it is besides. But for that, most of our places aren't doing it themselves. So maybe we need to introduce it at a level where it's being done.
Which only means that, yes, there is a demand.
I mean, I can share the thing of us getting LASIK. There was a huge debate with it's not easy being, everybody thinks it's a cakewalk, but you try to get even one needle in a government setup and try to convince the finance guys why you need it. So it made no sense to them. You are here at a tertiary care center dealing in blinding diseases, and you want to come and buy a 7 crore machine to take off glasses from somebody who doesn't want to wear them. For God's sake. So Professor Amod was amazing. He said, look, all that is fine, but I'm running a residency program. And if they're not going to be exposed to the refractive surgery, which is outside, I won't be doing justice. And that's how we got our refractive surgery suit, simply because it's a training program. So I think we can take this up forward and say aesthetic, at least basic aesthetics, because we are running residency programs, they need to be exposed to them.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Very nice.